Many people, in ignorance granted, are down there. And the very things they take to try and give them a lift are actually exhausting those hormones even more. It's a tragic state, isn't it? And that's how sugar affects the functioning of the brain, particularly the frontal lobe. As we looked at earlier, wheat can get it up even higher and plummet it even lower. There's a book called Grain Brain, and this author, he looks at the effect of wheat on the functioning of the brain. And he shows you how there's amylopectin A, which we looked at earlier. Remember, amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high. Amylopectin B in bananas and potatoes. Amylopectin C, which is in your legumes, nice. And that's the one we want. Our brain, because of it can only have a 2-minute supply of glucose, it needs that long, steady, constant, sure supply of nutrients. And wheat and sugar do not give it that. In his book, the author has stories of psychiatrists who've taken their schizophrenic, bipolar patients off wheat and getting a 50% recovery rate. That's why the book's called Grain Brain. Caffeine. How many Aussies woke up to these three this morning? Toast and jam and a cup of coffee, yeah? Cereal with milk and sugar and a cup of coffee. You go into any cafe, breakfast cafe, and you'll find the majority of Aussies are having those. As I said, many are sick through ignorance. How does caffeine affect the functioning of the brain? I touched on this earlier this week, but today I want to take you one step further and show you how it directly affects brain function. I'm drawing the nerve cell. These are the dendrites, or the receiving stations. This is the axon, or the arm that comes out of the nerve cell. This is the myelin sheath that I'm drawing. This is the fatty substance. 70% of the membrane around the cell is fat, and the majority of it is in this fatty substance here. The myelin sheath nourishes the nerve cell. The myelin sheath conducts the messages through the nerve cell. The myelin sheath insulates the nerve cell, and the myelin sheath protects the nerve cell. So, very important part of the nerve cell is the myelin sheath. The messages come out through these little filaments into these little boutons here, and then the messages are relayed through by electrical impulses to the next nerve cell. One nerve cell has the ability or the potential to communicate with 20,000 other nerve cells. It's quite phenomenal. It's an amazing brain that we have. What caffeine does is that interferes with these little neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters come in from the next nerve cell, the previous nerve cell, sent down the arm into the little boutons, and then they're released and communicate, give their messages to the next nerve cell. That can happen at 200 kilometers an hour, and sometimes we need it to be happening that fast. We've got a book called Caffeine Blues, and the author in there, he likens the effect of caffeine on the nerve cell to someone who's, say, on safari in Africa. They're with a party, they're separated from their party, they turn a corner and there's a tiger on the path. What would happen in the body? Whoa! Adrenaline response. Very quickly, adenosine levels rise. Adenosine is the neurotransmitter that acts like a fuse box. And when you're in a crisis, fuse box has to go, so adenosine levels drop when you meet a tiger on the path. The other neurotransmitter that's affected is acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that has to do with frontal lobe function. We're in a crisis. We need our intellect, reason and judgment sparky, because we're going to make a decision that'll probably save our life. Hopefully. So acetylcholine levels rise in this crisis. The other neurotransmitter is dopamine. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that gets us to pursue happiness, pursue reward. And of course, in this case, pursue freedom from the tiger. Something else happens. Blood pressure rises. Blood pressure rises because these muscles that are going to get you to run as fast as you've ever run in your life, they need a powerful amount of fuel. Blood supply to the stomach stops. We've got a crisis here. Digestion, we've got to forget about him right now. It's not the priority. All your working muscles are on edge, ready for the run or the climb or the fight of your life. Having a cup of coffee is equal in the body's reaction to meeting a tiger on the path. The problem is, half an hour later, the body says, they're not running, they're not jumping, they're not fighting. And we've got an imbalance in the brain here. Our brain runs according to precision balance. And the body cannot function when that balances out. It can function in a crisis, absolutely, but we're not meant to meet crises every day. Dendrite. To grab every little bit of adenosine that comes through in an attempt to maintain the balance. Acetylcholine levels drop in an attempt to get the balance. Eventually, dopamine levels are basically just exhausted. And then the person comes to Misty Mountain Health Retreat. We don't give them any coffee. Adenosine levels go back to normal. Receptor sites get flooded. Adenosine is also responsible for blood flow to the brain. So when adenosine levels go back to normal, we've got two things happening here. Blood flow returns to the brain in a flush. Receptor sites get flooded. Oh, does that hurt? More people suffer here from caffeine withdrawals than any other withdrawal. We've had people come off ice, ecstasy, heroin, marijuana, methadone, alcohol. No one suffers like the coffee drinker. That's why I classify this as one of the most dangerous drugs. And yet, isn't it Australia's darling? What's a darling? Something they love. One lady said, oh, I love my coffee. Just gets my brain going, just gets me up and going. I said, yes, that's right. No wonder you've met a tiger on the path. Wouldn't you get going if you met a tiger on the path? It does get the brain going. It does stimulate dopamine, which is your up and go hormone, your pursuit of reward, your pursuit of happiness. It's not a bad hormone. It's dopamine that gets me weeding my garden, and my reward is a weeded garden. So it's not that it's a bad hormone, but in the case of addictions, it's the thing that is spurring the person on in an unnatural way to go for that sugar again, to go for that wheat again, to go for that caffeine again, to go for that drug again. And yet the happiness is never achieved. It's just a pursuit of happiness. How would you feel if you met a tiger on the path every day for 6 months? How would you feel if you met 3 tigers on the path every day for 6 months? There's a tiger on the path. So what? Gobble, gobble, gobble. Eaten up by a tiger. The medical definition of depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain. Sugar and wheat are the most responsible for a fuel imbalance, and you couple that with caffeine that is the most responsible for a chemical imbalance in the brain. A young friend of mine who used to have coffee every morning, he said to me, I've discovered something that is more potent than coffee to get you moving in the morning. I said, what's that? He said, a cold shower. And you don't get the corresponding dump. Where is caffeine found? It is found in your Red Bulls, your V drinks, your Mother, your energy drinks. It's found